Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Well, good afternoon and welcome back to episode 2 of Fridays from the Van. No time for too much of a blurb at the intro because we have a few bits and pieces to cover, so let's crack straight on. Wanted to talk a little bit about legacy. This has been something that's been on my mind now for the last couple of months. Leaving something behind. More so than just a bunch of digital images on a bunch of social media platforms. More so than libraries and hard disks full of images. Even more so than individual prints, a book or books, a retrospective. Way too early for that kind of talk, of course. Something that I can kind of leave behind when I'm no longer here. Now, when I look through my Lightroom library, there's a whole random mess of images. Yes, they are created or curated from a topical point of view, be that seasonal, be that location, type, long exposure, for example. And I have a folder in my Lightroom library called Projects. And in there, I must have about 15 or 20 projects on the go. Some of them maybe only have a handful of images in them. Some of them have lots of images, but images that haven't really been sort of whittled down. Some of them that have been going on for years, and some of them which I maybe only started last week. I'll get an idea in my head and I'll think, actually, that could be a nice project, and I'll start taking some images and then I'll move on to something else. So when it comes to the thought of a legacy, the thought of leaving something behind, a tighter edit, for want of a better term, a more honed collection. You'll hear a lot of photographers out there talking about, the projects that they're working on, be it a book or something like that. And of course that means that they have a lot of dedicated time spent on chasing those images, making those images, and of course putting them together. So I think to myself, should I be spending more time on fewer projects, and rather than just going out and shooting randomly and shooting just scene after scene and location after location, maybe I should be honing this down a little bit, or narrowing this down a little bit. But then I'll go outside and I'll see beautiful light illuminating a dustbin, and I'll be like, oh, take a picture of that. Now, I don't really have the answer here. This is just something that's been rattling around inside my head. The concept of legacy, the concept of having something more tuned, more curated, versus just a whole pebble dash of images over the years. Now, for sure, what really I connect to is the quieter scene, the more intimate scene. I would love to have the dedication to simply go out and shun all other sort of views and always go after that intimate scene. Because of course, the more you do something, the more experienced you get at it, and hopefully the better work that you produce. Maybe, shooting so many random different types of images, I'm actually diluting my own work. And it even comes down to as far as the prints that I'm selling. Now, for a long time, for most of 2020, the only thing I had on my website for sale was a handful of limited edition prints. And these are prints that not only I had sort of poured my heart and soul into in terms of the creation of both the image itself and also the print, but also images that I felt most connected to. But this is my bread and butter, so I also put up a number of open edition prints. And this past week I've been thinking to myself, should I have done that? Am I maybe going down the Not selling myself out, because these are still images that I really like, but I wouldn't say I have the same emotional connection to them. So if I don't have an emotional connection to them, then perhaps they're not really going to connect with others. On the flip side of that, if I only were to put in my store those more intimate, those quieter scenes, and the scenes that I really connect to, I might only end up with a dozen, 2 dozen images at most in my library. Again, no real answers here, just really throwing out some thoughts. I'd be interested to hear your own thoughts. Now, hopefully there's more than enough of you out there who are watching this that simply love to take images. They're not really thinking about legacy and projects and really wearing themselves down from that perspective. But I would be interested to hear what folks think in regards to their own photography. Are they just happy just to shoot at the end of the year, have a whole range of images? Maybe they just love to travel outside of current conditions, of course, and they just love to collect images from the most beautiful of locations. Or maybe they are starting to think, you know what, I want to see my photography go in a certain direction, and without pigeonholing themselves into one particular genre, they really do want to spend more time focusing on that, be that maybe getting better at square format, getting better at the more intimate landscape, getting better at black and white. Or is it just like me, who I just love taking images? And I was having this conversation with Nicola over a cuppa the other morning, and she was saying, well, why can't you do both? Why can't you have your little, the area that you really are more attuned with, but at the same time take images of the grander view? For sure, when we come to travel, hopefully, I'll be doing more than just landscape photography. I'll be shooting some wildlife and maybe even some street photography as well, because I just love to make images. So I'm interested to hear what you thought, or what you think about the whole concept of a lasting legacy versus I'm just making images because it makes me happy. So in last week's video, I talked about I was going to try to spend a bit more time with a handful of images rather than simply doing the usual social media scroll click. And so this next little section, I'd like to just talk about an image, one of my favourite images from this particular photographer. Probably needs no introduction, Simon Baxter. To kick things off, an image from a photographer that I know that most of you will have heard of, and that is Simon Baxter. Now, this is actually an image that's been kind of sitting in my bookmarks folder for 6 months or so. I was going to sort of talk about this quite a while ago, but it just got put to one side. I think you would agree, for those of you who follow Simon's work, probably not one of his normal woodland images. It's devoid of, mist and fog and, those crepuscular rays. But actually, I think this is one of the reasons why I really like it. I think sometimes when we're in a woodland as a photographer and it's misty, we can sometimes allow the mist to maybe hide some of the compositional kind of flaws. But of course, when you have a scene like this where, the scene is very clear, then you have to work even harder on those compositional factors. So overall, I think it's the soft light that really appeals to me here. Soft light kind of throughout the whole frame, really well controlled. I even like what I would call little sort of scruffy bits in here. I know myself that when I am composing an image and I see something like that maybe doesn't have a lot of depth or colour to it, I would maybe try to avoid it, but Simon has included this in his frame expertly. I like the feeling of light and shadow. So there's light on the left-hand side, upper left-hand side here, compared to sort of a darker feel. There's light and shadow in the understory at various points. And you even have some lighter trees, some darker trees. Even here on this foreground fallen trunk, you have a little bit of light and shadow as well. There's a couple of little sort of triangle pairs in here that I quite like. So first one we have is this little shape here between the main leaning trunk and the left hand side. And then on the other side of the trunk, it's actually a triangle the other way around, and I quite like that balance between those two sections. Similarly then, if we sort of move our eye to the left, we have another little bit of a triangular gap between these two trees, which is kind of mimicked on this right hand side. And this wouldn't be something that I think you would pick up just when you first start looking at the image, but I think as you take time over a frame, this is the small elements that you start to become aware of, and it perhaps explains a little bit more as to why you've liked the image. You quite often hear photographers talking about edge patrol, that is, looking around the edge of the frame for elements coming into and exiting the frame. And I think sometimes if we're a little bit too precise about placement of elements, especially in the corners, for me anyway, it can sometimes feel a little bit contrived, and I think Simon has worked fantastically well here to give a more natural feel. Not least, if this would have been me, I would have been uncomfortable in leaving this space here, but actually the right decision would be how Simon has put it. Even having some branches exiting and entering the frame, I think it just gives a nice little bit of space to this upper branch. And similarly, this bottom right hand, or this bottom trunk, this fallen trunk, again just a little bit of space in the corner, and spaces in this corner as well. So again, in terms of placement, I think again another little element that on first viewing of the image I don't notice, but as I really start to spend time with it, I really start to see little elements like that obviously go towards why I like the image so much. And then finally, on a semi-related note, the connection between the various elements. Again, I think Simon spoke about this in one of his recent vlogs, about how the flow between the various branches in a woodland can really help set the scene. And that's certainly what I'm seeing here. There is some lovely connections, this tree here, this branch leaning down and just sort of touching the very top of this little sapling. You have a little bit of a connection here between the foreground element, these trees kind of pointing, but also, in fact, now that I'm just speaking, maybe pointing, but also opening up. There's almost a little opening to let your eye sort of come through. This tree here, mostly sort of hidden by the bush, by the bramble, but there's just some little sort of branches coming out that almost look as though they're holding up, doing a final kind of hold up of this tree that's leaning. And then finally here again, it's almost like there's a little arm coming in and just holding up the tree. So again, just connections between the various elements in the frame. And then just finally here, something again that taking time over the image, even just talking to you, recording this piece, more elements, more pleasing elements have become apparent. So speaking a little bit about that, sort of those triangles, these three trees forming a little bit of a nice connection balance. You also have a nice sort of triangular shape going on in here. And talking about connections along the floor, you actually have this trunk connected to this branch, connected out into the wider scene. So this is one of the reasons why I am trying to spend longer over a number of images per week. Now, clearly not able to do this with every image that we see, but just taking time. So what I've done is I've left this image kind of bookmarked, And a couple of times over the past week, I've just had it open, sat with a cuppa, and just enjoyed it. Now, it'd be great if this was larger. Unfortunately, it's only on Instagram. But even just looking at an image like this for more than the split second that the Instagram scroll wheel will allow us, there's so many different elements that have become apparent that I was not immediately aware of. But clearly they have been elements that have drawn me towards this image and why I like it so much. And of course, as well, from a teaching perspective, taking time to really study what works in an image from someone like Simon, who has clearly put a lot of work in here in the field, is beneficial also. So I would highly encourage you to take even one image this coming week, one image that you kind of liked or commented on, and spend a bit of time with it. And again, this isn't a critique session. We're not saying what could have been done better or asking questions why the photographer did this. It's simply sort of saying to yourself why you like the image. And those elements that I spoke about, I think they all pull together, which is one of the reasons why I really like this frame from Simon. And again, following on from last week where I said I was going to try to extract myself a little bit more from social media, consuming images in other forms, specifically from a digital perspective on photographers' websites. And that's what I'd like to talk a little bit about in this next section, introducing you, if you haven't already heard of, one of my favourite photographers and my photographer of the week. So I'm really going to try and find photographers who perhaps some of you may not have heard of. I think I touched on this in a previous vlog, how sometimes when we're attached to our social media streams, it perhaps feels that there's only maybe 50 photographers out there in the whole world. We kind of see the same images from the same folks, so hopefully I can maybe introduce one or two of you to a couple of different photographers. First up is Adrian. He's a Spanish-American photographer with, according to his bio, no fixed abode. Bit of a wanderer, a bimbler. I quite like that. Now, one word pops into my head every time I view Adrian's work, and that's consistency. And it's more than simply the fact that he shoots black and white. Now, he did used to shoot colour, apparently, and then, I'm not sure when it was, but he actually deleted all of the images from his Instagram account, and he now has a very consistent black and white look. But you can probably see here that yes, all of the images are just a very consistent look, and I think that has a very appealing feel to it when you're actually browsing his work. Now, I love the process he has in his online store. He actually adds one image per month, carefully created, with a backstory, often with an accompanying vlog. So that whole consistent view, that whole kind of connected elements, I think is really appealing. Speaking of the vlog, and again this whole thought of consistency, so this is just one of the vlogs that I've pulled up, and I love how he presents his images on the vlog with this textured feel to them. And while I can't be 100% sure, I think the paper that he uses for his prints is actually quite similar to that. So again, it's just that consistency of work. It's interesting as well that he speaks that he has no permanent home. So he actually doesn't print his own work, instead relying on a professional lab. And if you remember, if you've watched one of my Moments Between vlogs from a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about something similar, about trying to get more confident with using an external lab for those times when I can't print at home. So interesting that he actually uses an external professional lab. You've heard me speak about serendipity on this vlog a couple of times, and I was just watching Adrian's latest vlog as I prepared this little piece, and I think one thing or one photographer springs to mind when I view Adrian's work, and that would be quite Michael Kenna-esque. And so it was great to see that he had actually picked himself up a Michael Kenna book. Clearly, he does garner lots of inspiration from his work. And similarly, he was speaking about some of his older medium format images, and he pulled out a slide that he described as one of his favourites. And it just so happens that it's one of my favourites from him as well. And that's The Last of Winter. Such a beautiful, beautiful image. I love the different tones of the trees, the separation in the trees, that almost sort of to the left and to the right kind of shapes. In the background here, there's just a little hint of what's going on in the backstory. A little bit of texture in that foreground as well. It's not completely blown out white. And I bet you this image does look fantastic, printed and mounted up, as Adrian shows on his website. But yeah, just a really beautiful image from a very talented photographer, and I would certainly encourage you to not only take some time browsing Adrian's work, but also, as I said in last week's vlog, maybe pull yourself away a little bit from time to time from the social media train. Get back to viewing people's work on their website, where you can take a bit of control over viewing that work. But I would certainly encourage you to spend a few moments this weekend looking through Adrian's work. So how about a little bit of handheld panoramic photography with the iPhone? Now obviously the iPhone does come with a panoramic mode, but what about if you actually wanted a slightly bigger resolution image? Why not just give it a go? You know, it's funny actually, whenever you're shooting a normal image on a normal camera and you're going in for the tripod, you're very precise about the leveling, and so you should be, because that gives you the best option. But don't forget that you can also do a little bit of handheld stuff as well, and I've got a few reasonably sort of happy panoramic images with my Fuji, but I've only just thought to myself, I wonder how would it work with the iPhone. So basically we'll just fire over to shooting on the GoPro. So first up, do a little sweepy sweep just to see what the pano potential is going to look like. Now I'm shooting this on the ultra zoom, exposing for the highlights, and then no great shakes here, folks. Just take a couple of images, as many you want in your pano, with a certain percentage of overlap. Now of course one of the issues with just exposing for the highlights is the exposure could change, so in this one I've actually locked the exposure so the exposure will stay the same. Same premise, just sweeping from left to right, trying to keep a line on the horizon as straight as possible. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I probably could have been kinder to the iPhone sensor here with this image this morning. The dynamic range I think was just a little bit too much, even for that iPhone 12 Pro Maximus Spartacus. But this ended up being a, let me just put us in the full screen. So it ended up being a 5,385 by 4884. That's about a 22 megapixel image. Cropped, it turned out to be about a 5300 by 3000, about a 16 megapixel image, 46 megapixel DNG. But as I say, the dynamic range didn't really help it. But as a concept, I think it's something to be explored. And in fact, let's take a look at an image that perhaps works better with better light. So here's the one that I took yesterday, in fact. I think this is a 5-shot panoramic. You can agree that the light was much kinder to the sensor in the iPhone. If I just bring up the original crop so you can see what I've had to crop out. Now the original file in this case was 7336 by 4795. That's a 35 megapixel 77 megabyte DNG, and then cropped it comes down to a 6800 odd by 3800 odd, about a 26 megapixel file. So not bad. And if I just kind of zoom in, if I go full screen here and zoom in, you know, not bad at all. There was one little blip in the blending, and you can just about see it if I let my computer catch up. You can just see a little blip here that isn't really noticeable anywhere else on the image, just kind of there. But it's a very small detail. Now, I would say that I could print this rather large, and in fact what I might do is I might send this off to somewhere like DS Color Labs and get it printed quite large and just see what the quality's like. But must admit, quite impressed with what you can do with an iPhone. Bit of handheld panoramic. Yeah, give it a go yourself. So there you go, a little bit of panoramic photography with the iPhone, and it's probably something that I will do a little bit more of, even if it just means shooting raw on this here and getting, what is it, 12 megapixels or something. Now you're still obviously dealing with the sensor, so you've still got to be careful with noise and things like that, but you know, if I want something that's maybe just going to be slightly bigger, and obviously not just from a resolution point of view, but maybe from an aspect ratio point of view, I might actually try to start honing my skills with using the iPhone, doing a few sort of handheld panoramic. Now last week I also spoke about I was going to commit for the first 6 months of 2021 to an artist support pledge, and basically this meant that for every 5 images that I sold, I would then purchase another piece of work to the maximum value of my most highest selling print, which would be £35. Well, I'm pleased to say that I have managed to actually reach my first target of 5 prints, and so I treated myself to a little bit of artwork. Now, 2 things here. Number 1, I actually went a little bit over budget, but I just thought that next time, if I do manage to sell another 5 prints, my next purchase won't be as expensive. The other thing is, it's not open as such yet. In fact, it has just been delivered about half an hour ago. Delivered to the van, bizarrely, and on the address it actually says van. Anyway, quite interesting as well that this has appeared today when I've been talking about legacy and a tighter sort of curated work. And I'm pretty sure, even though I haven't opened this yet, this is going to scream exactly that. And a photographer who probably doesn't need too much of an introduction. One of my favourite photographers out there, not only from a stills perspective, but from a storytelling perspective as well. And I am absolutely looking forward to pouring myself something smoky this evening and spending some time with this. It is, of course, Between the Wind by Ben Horn. So yeah, looking forward to that. And of course I am thankful that I've managed to sell those 5 prints, and I'm also pleased that I've been able to use some of that money to help support another artist. Speaking of prints, very quickly, I have added a couple of additional open edition prints to my store, and I've also added a little wildlife section in there as well. I actually had a couple of people ask me did I still have some of my older wildlife prints, so I've added those as well. I have, however, added another print to my limited edition section, and this was taken on a beautiful summer's evening last year along the Causeway Coast, and despite the conditions being absolutely incredible and just screaming out for maybe the wider view, I found myself, as I quite often do, looking down at my feet. And I think what really appeals to me in this image was literally seconds later the tide came across and washed it away. So it's a moment that was captured in a second, or whatever time it was, second and a half maybe, but gone forever. So I've added that to my limited edition store. It's an A3 print, printed on photo speed smooth cotton paper. Alright guys, so I think we'll call it there. This second episode of Fridays from the Van. I think I am going to have to wrap things up because I've been joined in the van by Nicola and Boris the crazy foster dog. But hopefully you gleaned something from that. I think next week we'll try to make things a little bit shorter. But for now, with the rain coming on, and of course I have been brought a nice mug of tea, which is always appreciated, I shall say goodbye. And on Sunday, I think we are in the woods. Yep, we're in the frosty woods. So until then, take care. Bye-bye.